Hey everyone, it's vmcampos, comic book fan. Welcome to the weekly vmcampos Comic Book Club. This is the series where I answer the question, what am I reading this week? This week I've got Spider-Man 2099 number 1 from Marvel Comics, published in 1993. For the audio version of the podcast, head on over to your favorite podcast app, Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Search vmcampos and subscribe. Spoiler alert, I will be going through the various pages of this book, but I will not reveal the whole plot. However, you're encouraged to buy the book, support your favorite comic shops, your favorite creators and companies. It's worth it. This is the series where I review a comic book, new or old, from my collection, and rate it upon the following factors from a scale of 1 to 5. The cover art, interior art, plot, and enjoyability of the book. Let's get started. In the year 2019, we are 80 years past the very first Marvel comic ever published. Way back in 1939, the first Marvel comic was published, and it was called Marvel Comics. 80 years later now, in the year 2019, we celebrate a milestone on Marvel Comics. 80 years from now will be the year 2099, the namesake of this series, the Marvel 2099 universe. And this was the flagship book, published in 1993, of that future world. Basically, what would the Marvel universe be like in the year 2099? At the point of publication, 100 years in the future. And here we are, closer than ever. The cover. For pure nostalgia, this is a 5 out of 5. Dig this glorious 1990s gimmick cover. Shiny red foil. I love it. I also love the pose here. This is by Leonardi and Williamson. They depict Miguel O'Hara, the Spider-Man of the future. This is the origin issue. And I've got a nice newsstand copy of the book right here, which are a little harder to find in good condition because, again, it's the newsstand. Things got beaten up. I got this comic recently. I've always had my original copy from the direct edition, which was the comic shops. I've still had this one from the 90s in good condition. And then I recently got the newsstand edition just to top off the collection. If we are being a little more subjective, I would still give the cover a very high rating, a 4 out of 5. We have this very cool pose of Spider-Man 2099 leaping at you, jumping past the frame. A cool perspective looking down at the city of Nueva York. It is the future after all. And the public eye police force is blasting at him. All the 2099 titles of the time had this foil treatment in various colors. There was Punisher 2099, Doom 2099, and Ravage 2099 in the original run. There had been others then, Hulk 2099, X-Men 2099, Ghost Rider 2099, and more. Even Deadpool ripped off the cover from when his Deadpool 2099 descendant was revealed. Interior art is by Rick Leonardi and Al Williamson. Interior pages are the classic 90s cheap quality newsprint, but panel layouts are interesting. I love this amazing splash page early on with, again, Spider-Man 2099 leaping at you. There's a lot of stuff happening in the high rises of the city. It's standard 90s style, realistic anatomy, good panel layout, a few close-ups of Spider-Man reacting. There's a few aspects that are kind of bloodless, par for the course in the 90s. That was a shot that would have worked a little better if there really was blood to raise the stakes a little bit. There are a few parts that I don't quite love the expressions, and some simplification of art when there are crowds and such. I'll give the interior art a 4 out of 5. It is on a technically good level. There are interesting transitions in time, panel shots. but it's still a little bit of that 90s style, which is, of course, 25 years ago, so styles change. Sometimes there's a little bit too much detail in some of the shadows that are not quite necessary. Sometimes there's too much shadow. Sometimes the models are a little off. So a 4 out of 5, I think, is a good rating. The story. This is pretty interesting. So the story is by Peter David. He's a big name in the world of comics, of course. He worked with the Hulk, and then did some other things here, like the 2099 Spider-Man. Now, I do have to say that for the nostalgia, I love Spider-Man 2099, but story-wise, I didn't really like this first issue rereading it. I read it, of course, in the 90s, and I have memories of loving it, and now reading it again, I don't. Unfortunately, I feel that Spider-Man's alter ego, Miguel O'Hara, is kind of brash, kind of a jerk, kind of talks back a little too much. In this first issue, I don't get the sort of like nuance of really wanting to relate with the character as much as the classic Peter Parker. He's completely sympathetic in his first origin appearance. His uncle is killed. Uncle Ben is killed, and with great power comes great responsibility. I don't see any sort of sense like that in this first issue to really grab you like that. There's a tragic thing that happens to Miguel that turns him into Spider-Man, literally, but I don't really get a sense that I like him very much. And I think that's one of the things they wanted to do about the Spider-Man of the future. It's the future and everything. But I'm going to say it's a 3 out of 5. I like how they created this futuristic world with futuristic lingo, like shock is the new bad word of the future instead of the F word. And there's like a little bit of lingo here and there that makes it futuristic. And we have holograms and some action and such, intrigue on the first quarter of the book, and then a little bit of backstory about getting into how Miguel becomes Spider-Man. But I didn't really like it as much rereading it 25 years later, so I'll give it a 3 out of 5. The enjoyability, then, I'll give that a 4 out of 5. I still enjoyed it reading it 25 years later, not as much as in the beginning, but again, I just love the character. I thought Leonardi and Williamson did a great job on the art overall. The story will progress on the future issues, but judging by just one issue, it's okay. That all adds up to a pretty good rating, 4 out of 5. Introduction of this character, and a little bit of a nostalgia trip going back to read it again. The first appearance of Spider-Man 2099 was actually in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man number 365 in 1992. A year prior, Marvel had started to plan the 2099 universe, and then eventually in 93 they were released. That was in November 93. And so the classic hologram cover of Amazing Spider-Man number 365, kind of hard to pick up on video, but if you see these in real life, they're amazing. So I still have a copy of that. Actually, I have another copy of it that I got a little bit recently in a bundle, and then I've also got the Newsstand Edition version. Well, the first 5 pages of Spider-Man 2099 number 1 were shown here also on this 30th anniversary of the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365. So that's kind of cool to get that first preview, and then in November later, we got his first full comic. Also around the same time, in 1992, Web of Spider-Man number 90, another anniversary issue of Spider-Man was released. This one also with some cool holograms, but this one has a very cool gatefold poster featuring Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2099, Spider-Man of the 90s, or I guess the 60s, and Spider-Man of the 2090s. So it's a really cool poster. I still have it intact in the issue. I also have another copy of the same issue. I got it in a lot of books. I don't have the Newsstand Edition of that, which I want to get, but what I do have is what's this? The gold hologram second printing of Web of. This one came out in July, and then we had November reprint. So again, previewing Spider-Man 2099 gatefold poster, second printing. It's a little bit subtle unless you really see them side by side. By itself, you don't see a difference, but with the original, we've got the original silver plus gold hologram. So really cool additions to my collections regarding Spider-Man 2099. And then when I got back into comics a little bit more heavily in 2014, I was very happy to see that they were bringing back Spider-Man 2099. So I picked up issue 1 when this debuted. Partly the same creative team. Peter David returns to write it as well, but then we have Slinny and Fabella as the art duties. Now there was a variant cover with Rick Leonardi reprising his art duties. And so that's kind of interesting to see this decades later, the same artist doing a #1 cover of the same character, and just really cool to see this different interpretation with more modern eyes. I love this Spider-Man 2099 variant cover. One gripe that I do have about the newest generation is I would have loved for them to have continued the logo. I love that logo, the Spider-Man in the year. I didn't really feel that the word Spider-Man stood out very much. 2099 looks techie enough, but I would have liked to have the originals, which is actually returning because in the year 2019, Marvel is going to publish again some Marvel 2099 books, and they are bringing back the original numbers logo, it seems. So Spider-Man 2099 will return again in 2019, along with a bunch of other 2099 titles, basically all the originals. Well, after Volume 2 of Spider-Man 2099, there was a third volume after Secret Wars. Volume 2 broke the Marvel Universe. He got a new costume, Miguel O'Hara's new costume right here. I think it's really cool, actually. I like the style of it. Francesco Mattina did the covers of Volume 2, and they were pretty amazing. I loved that style. And so here we have, as of this video, the original 2099, then the Volume 2 and the Volume 3. Pretty amazing. So this week I read Spider-Man 2099, #1, published by Marvel Comics in 1993. Once again, if you'd like to hear the audio version, subscribe over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all your favorite places. Just search VM Campos and subscribe. This has been the weekly VM Campos Comic Book Club, and I'll see you next week.